Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Dr. Saumitra Chaudhuri, former member Planning Commission, as also a member of the former Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, with us to talk about the economy in general, the recent budget, the messages coming out of the budget, as well as how things might pan out in the next six months in the economy. Welcome to our show, Dr. Saumitra Chaudhuri. Now, you have been an author of so many reports in the last 2-3 years from the Planning Commission on various issues in regard to policy making, economic policy making. How do you see the budget and what do you see as the main idea coming out of the budget? Because a lot of commentators have said there's a lot of continuity in the budget. A lot of numbers present in the budget papers are those which were there in the interim budget, to which, of course, you might also have been privy to. You worked with the earlier finance minister. So, and there's change in terms of how BJP government looks at growth. Now, how do you see this whole the new framework?
You know, I think that the budget was an important milestone. I think some of the expectations that you would find a radically different posture was unrealistic. I think the budget does two very important things. It firmly anchors this government's commitment to fiscal prudence, which I think was very advisable.
The same numbers as the previous government.
Well, that's a bit, could have been slightly different, but in effect it is the same number. The point is that the path of fiscal consolidation, this government has made it very clear that it is strongly wedded to that particular path. I think that's good for the economy, is good for investors, is good for the investment climate, which has taken such a beating over the last 3 years. The second part of it is, I think the budget speech at some length gives you a sense of the priorities of this government. You know, the people have made comments about, the 100 crore long list, but I think each of them are important because what it really says is this government is as interested as setting up small airports, to railway lines, to the child health, is sort of stated its priorities. And I think one should take it in that spirit. This government has certain priorities, and all of these amounts may not be very large to begin with, but they indicate the direction in which the government wishes to travel. So I think it has done that job. However, partly because of I think expectations which were slightly unrealistic regarding what the budget might have, people felt a bit let down. And the second thing, I think there were some taxation issues in the budget which was a bit unexpected perhaps, and that certainly spoiled the mood which was there before the budget.
Which issues?
Things like GAR, etc. I think it did. And I think there was a feeling, and I also thought maybe, that on the Vodafone issue there would be a clear direction of resolution. I understand the previous government did try to resolve it the last couple of years, but there were some limitations to what they could do. But I thought that this government might take that step. They might still do it. So I think people expected a clear-cut resolution, which is not there. And some of the other kind of things like GAR, etc., I think it scares people. That's what it could well be because of the past history. So in any case, I think those were downsides. But there
was an assurance that they won't do anything to appear retrospective in taxing.
That is only in regard to retrospective amendments. Retrospective amendments, the minister has said that he's against making a retrospective amendment where it creates a fresh liability. Though the retrospective amendment, the right to have a retrospective amendment, he defends. Because in certain cases it's necessary.
But GAR is different.
GAR is different because GAR
Actually, this is very interesting because a lot of people so far have been confusing GAR with retrospective taxation, but they're two separate things, right?
I think GAR is the problem with GAR is that first of all it's a new concept. It's not an old. It's certainly a new concept in India. It's even a new concept in the
initiated by the West, actually.
Yeah, in the West it's been around for a bit longer. And there are certain safeguards. For example, in Sweden, the law clearly states that if a notice is to be issued by GAR, these tax authorities have to first get a court to agree that the prima facie case for issuing a notice under GAR, or the equivalent of GAR in Sweden. So there are certain, let's say, this has matured in a particular way. People are
there are judicial safeguards.
Only whatever the safeguards, people know how it works. I think in this place the problem is, it's very often you get slap notices which, well, for whatever reason, if somebody wants to show that large liability. For example, there's so many cases under litigation. I think in the budget also says there's so many lakh crore rupees under litigation. Do you think all of these are claims which are very justiciable? Probably are not, and most of them will be struck down by court.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, this kind of thing goes on. I think it's partly our own immaturity, and I think the fear is that if you have kind of broad-ranging powers, then the tax officer who's under pressure to show more tax collection. Remember, one of the problems of having things like large subsidies is that the tax guys that keep on, twisting their tail, saying "provide me more money," may actually resort to somewhat arbitrary practices. I think these are the kind of apprehensions people have. So when GAR was first introduced in 2012 budget, thereafter there were, I think, many attempts to have a second look at it. I had a small role to play in that, and as a result, in a sense, many of these issues got somewhat put in the back burner till we sort of had a clearer understanding of how this is going to transpire. So I don't know whether there is real reason for apprehension, but certainly I can understand the reasons for the apprehension.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Chaudhuri, the main apprehension in regard to GAR came from the FII community, which thought that GAR would give a license to the taxman to start inquiring into all the corporate entities registered in Mauritius, because much of the investments are coming through Mauritius, and which is why the markets went into a fright, and subsequently, I think P. Chidambaram laid to rest all those apprehensions. But it's still, the FII community is still working on their minds.
I think this is not restricted to the FII community. It's restricted to all taxpayers.
No, I'm saying the fright came from the FII community.
I think this is apprehension that cuts across the investment communities and tax-paying communities. I think Indian businessmen are as apprehensive of tax notices because it's happened.
Yeah.
See, this is
because they're also registered through Mauritius.
No. Even if they're not registered to Mauritius, they can be jolly well registered here.
Okay.
I mean, they're used to these tax notices, which eventually sometimes are told, look, we have to, why don't you come and provide the documents and they will not be pursued.
Okay.
Or you pay. You see, when you issue a tax notice, if you want to, for example, appeal against it, you have to pay 50% of tax notice and then appeal it. So you pay, next year you'll be refunded. I mean, this is unfortunately, because of the year-end pressures of collection of tax, this has become a bit of a practice, and people sort of assume that if there is GAR and that's, let's say, gives a greater degree of discretion, there will be more of this. Okay. So I don't think this is restricted to the FII or anything like that. They may have spoken about it louder, but I think it affects everybody.
So now, do you think the budget should have mentioned that GAR is indefinitely postponed in order to give the business community or the investing community some
I don't know enough of the status of this issue. As I said, I was involved, but that was about a year ago in the budget of 2013, and I don't know the current status, so I would not like to comment.
And I interviewed the finance minister on Rajya Sabha TV after the budget. In regard to Vodafone also, he did say that at this time, the government cannot give any assurance because these are matters lying in the courts. So the courts would naturally then resolve.
No, that is one view. The other view is that if you were to amend the IT Act and say that retrospective amendment will be with effect from the date on which the bill was tabled in the Lok Sabha, which would have been February 2012. I think the issue of litigation in the courts would have vanished, would have become, redundant. But you see, the problem, I think, is that if you do that, there will be critics who will say that you cost the exchequer so many thousand crore rupees, and that has a certain political unpleasantness, and that is therefore
potential public interest litigation,
potential God knows what. Also, I think that is the reason for this For the same, I think the same reason tied the previous finance minister's hands as well. So if you do a thing which is not wise, then the costs of that are quite substantial.
Which are the other growth impulses that you see in the budget?
No, I think the fact that there is a new government in place, the fact that they are sort of
clearing projects,
the fact that they have not introduced a new tax, the fact that they, I think all these are positive. Let's not look at only what is in the budget. We must remember what is not in the budget.
Not in the budget, yeah.
So lots of stuff. If a new tax had been proposed in the budget, that would have been cause for concern. If, let's say, a new scheme which was quite crazy was announced, then that would have been a cause for concern. So none of that is there. I think it sort of lays to rest any apprehension that there will be any kind of, after 2012 budget, there's been a lot of scare that something may come up in the budget that completely unexpected and it can really derail things. So everybody now feels, I think, that the kind of recovery process is on track. It has been on track for actually a couple of years. And it would have given us results were it not for the fact that last year we had a foreign exchange crisis, the summer of 2013, which completely upset everybody's calculations. So there is a recovery process slowly sort of coming on around, and I think this government can do much more to hasten it.
Okay. And do you feel that, if you notice the finance minister at the outset, in the opening of his budget speech, he talked about the global situation and he talked about, unconventional monetary policy being resorted to by the West and oil price, etc. So there is the apprehension that the global situation is still not totally normal, because I'm saying this because BJP, when it was in the opposition, and Congress used to say that the global situation has also resulted in a lot of the economic down cycle. The BJP didn't accept that. So now I'm surprised. I'm not surprised actually that the BJP is also now talking about the global situation as still not very certain.
I think the global situation is a bit of a cop-out. Because if you say that things are not as good as they were till 2007, therefore we can't get 9% growth, I'd agree with that. But if you say because of the global situation we're getting 5% growth, I don't agree with it. I think between 5 and 7 is really what we do in our own country. That is in our hands. So if we muck it up, we'll get 5 or up below 5. If we don't muck it up, we can get maybe up to 7. Maybe beyond that, to some extent, it's greatly dependent on what happens. If you go to 10%
and all,
no, forget about 7. Even maybe 8 may be dependent on global circumstances. But I think anything up to 7.5% is doable. China is getting 7.5%. No reason why we can't get something like that on a much bigger base. It's an $8 trillion economy, 4 times bigger than us. So there's no reason why we can't do that. So I think that's in our hands. And I think for the last 2 or 3 years, and I must say that I'm party to those, though I never myself said it.
We'll discuss this in more detail after a break. Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with Dr. Saumitra Chaudhuri, former member Planning Commission. You are very rightly making a very interesting point that up to 7% we could have got if we had got things right domestically. Maybe 1.5%, 2%, beyond 7% we couldn't get because of the global situation. Now, you were very actively, you were part of policy making then, and as you yourself admitted. Now, what are the things that really, we know what went wrong, but what are the things that this government can set right which actually went wrong in the last 2 years?
I think if you ask me what went wrong, I think the thing that went most wrong was this prevailing sense of hubris that we had weathered the global economic crisis very well. I was involved in some of the managements. I know how touch and go it was. But a lot of people feel that, India sort of, this is the Asian century. India's destiny is to grow at some crazy percent. So therefore, this is the given. You're going to grow at a very fast rate. And, after the crisis in 2009, 10, and 10, 11, we did grow at 8.5% and above.
In fact, 10% in 2010,
no,
I think. 9.5%.
8.5%. So basically, people felt that, anybody who's saying we need sound economic policy, we need to encourage investment, is talking through his hat. We can do all kind of crazy stuff, and it's not going to cost us anything, and still going to get growth. So the crazy stuff cost us what Whatever went wrong was because of proactive measures, two kind of things. One was proactive measures taken by a section within the government, which had serious repercussions, seriously damaged the growth potential of the economy. And the second were these revelations on corruption, which also completely undermine the credibility of the government. So basically the last 3 years has been bad. We set many things right. We tried to set many things right. And as I said earlier, that in 2013, we were confident of a bounce in the economy. And I think it would have happened had it not been for the FX crisis, which basically took any possibility of a recovery, threw it out of the window. It started in May, end of May, and continued up to September, October. It was devastating. Now, that's all that's behind us. We have a new government. I think the fact that we have a new government which doesn't carry the baggage of the previous one certainly contributes to confidence levels, higher confidence among consumers and investors. And I think we can come around. In fact, one of the things that if I were to be asked, what are those things could the finance minister have said in his budget? I think he could have been a bit more bullish about growth. I don't think he needn't have been so defensive. I think we can maybe this year approach 6% with a little bit of luck, because the monsoon is bad and that's the iffy part of it. And maybe the next year get to 6.5% or thereabouts. I think this is doable, especially given the fact that the government has, whatever we can hear, is sort of focused on getting infrastructure investment off the ground, focused on clearing up a lot of these inefficiencies that have been in the system. If it does all that, there's no reason why in a couple of years' time we can not be at a much more comfortable level in the economy.
And what do you think of what many people describe as the environment tax on growth, which
I think we have been paying
which
that.
slowed this growth cycle in the previous.
We have been paying that in the last few years.
regime.
The environment tax, the CAG tax, the corruption tax. I mean, you name it. I mean, if you you go too far in any one direction, then I think there are certain consequences, and these consequences are grossly negative.
Okay. And now, so you're suggesting that the growth cycle has bottomed out. You said we could go up to 6, so that means we are on an uptrend.
We could. I think we could. I mean, you say bottomed out, you could still be stuck on the bottom.
Okay.
So even I also last year, someone asked me around, maybe not now, but maybe in April or May 2013, I would have said we have bottomed out, but we didn't bottom out because we continue to be sitting in the bottom. So but I think this year, unless something goes drastically wrong, I think things will look up. There's been some early signs or numbers which are a bit better, but I hope that in the coming months will be better. Monsoon is the one iffy thing.
We've seen some uptick in export growth, double digit, and some,
but
some industrial production picking up.
Read too much into it because we need to see this sustain for a few months. I think it will sustain, but I think we need to get a bit more evidence on the ground to actually suggest that this year should close out at let's say a growth of around maybe 5.5 to 6%, or maybe 5.7 or 5.8. It could happen. It could undershoot that. If the monsoon effects of the monsoon and management of the effects of the monsoon are not as good as it might have been.
Is the monsoon situation, some newspapers suggest that somewhat improving, the shortfall is not the same as thought 3 weeks ago?
No, till about 10 days ago, the shortfall was in the order of 47, 46%.
45, 46%.
Now it's 32%, but 32% is a lot of shortage.
Still a lot of shortage, yeah.
Let's see how it pans out in the rest of July and August, and if it rains reasonably well. Kharif harvest is certainly going to be hit, and the Rabi will be protected.
Tell me, if this situation, as you said, even a 35% shortfall is a lot, and if this results in persistent, say, food inflation, what could be the impact on the on growth and in general on the economy? Because the one thing that we have not been able to crack the causes or even the how to get around this problem is this persistent food inflation at 10% above for the last 5-6 years. Some analysts say even 10 years now. Why are we getting such high food inflation year after year? And why isn't agriculture responding to it in terms of higher production? Isn't that a puzzle?
No, it's not a puzzle. Agriculture has responded to this higher demand. Production growth has been good. Agricultural GDP growth
you would say across the board?
More or less across the board, 4 to 5%. Where the demand is very strong, like in vegetables and fruit and animal husbandry products, the growth output growth has been even stronger. The problem is with our marketing. Our marketing chains are weak. There's a fair amount of wastage. There's a fair amount of scope for price markups, monopolistic behavior. In fact, I am very happy to see that the central ministry has issued advisory to all the states to amend the APMCs to take perishables out of the compulsory list, something that actually my committee that I had chaired in 2012 recommended, and we have been trying to convince people to do that.
Which year was that you recommended?
Early 2012.
Okay.
So if that happens, I think we would get a possibility of better chains. I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but we need to drastically improve the marketing infrastructure for perishable products, where much of the inflation actually is. If you look at the composition of the primary food inflation, much of it is in the area of fruit, vegetables, eggs, meat, and fish. And this is partly the reason is that there isn't we don't have cold chains, we don't have proper distribution systems. As far as cereals are concerned, part of it, the problem has been with rice, for instance. Though the product we have had record harvests, rice inflation is still running at 12-13%, and that is because of the equalization in the international prices and the drop in the rupee. Because the rupee has dropped basically, even if the dollar price hasn't gone up, the rupee price has gone up. This has always been an issue. How do we deal with essentially importing the effect of international price movements? And not that there is any price movement now, there has been a currency movement, but these are the factors which impact on primary food inflation. And food inflation is very critical because it determines wage rates, and it can become a very serious problem, as it did. In fact, in 2009, we also had a bad monsoon.
So you're suggesting that if food inflation persists at these levels, and if you're not able to fix it with all the logistics measures that you're talking about, then it will be difficult to get growth back to 6.5–7%?
No, I'm not saying that's going to happen. All I'm saying is in 2009, which is the first year of the UPA 2, the year I actually joined the Planning Commission, we had a very bad monsoon. It's worst monsoon in 28 years. And I remember what all we had to try to do in that, and the kind of, I think, little slip-ups we did also here and there. I hope the government is sort of informed about what was done or what was not done, what was done on time, what was not done on time. And I think the price situation can be contained. If you remember, in that year, 2009-10, agricultural output did not decline, though there was a shortfall in the Kharif harvest. So you can manage the situation provided you take sufficient preemptive measures and you do price intervention and you take intelligent action. You can manage it. It's a challenge, but you still can manage it, because I think eventually the monsoon will turn out to be not very good, but perhaps it not be in the range of, let's say, -32%, and probably in the range of -8, 15, 20%. I hope so, at least touch wood. So I think you could manage it.
No, the other larger question I'm asking you, Dr. Chaudhuri, is that do you think a higher growth path is possible with persistently high inflation? Is there a history, does history show that high growth and high inflation can go
generally not
together?
Generally not, but that is also episodic. It depends on what's happening to everybody else. If, for instance, you are in a generally high inflationary period, as it was in the 1980s, when everybody had high inflation, it was not so bad. That
but
didn't matter.
we came down to 4% average.
I'm talking everybody else. I mean, every other country had high inflation. It didn't perhaps matter much. But when you have a situation where all the rest of the world isn't experiencing high inflation,
and India is an outlier,
then it can become a real problem. No, it's not exactly an outlier, but nevertheless it becomes the real problem. So I think we need to be able to contain it, and I think the ways to contain primary food inflation, which is a serious problem, lie mostly in improving the logistics and distribution chain and taking intelligent and calculated
And you
action.
can't do much about fuel because it's dictated by international oil prices.
Well, fuel prices are, fuel price inflation isn't that high today, because partly the reason is the adjustment has been taking place over a period of time. In the last 3 years, international prices of crude on average hasn't really gone up in dollar terms.
So the base has settled in some ways.
But in rupee terms, of course, it has gone up. So, base has somewhat settled. So I think inflation can be managed. If you have lower inflation, the better.
And how? And because of high inflation, it seems the central bank, RBI, is not looking at other options in monetary policy making, like some out-of-the-box thinking, whether interest rates can be reduced to give that little kickstart to growth?
All I will say is that if you have if you are a manufacturing unit and the inflation that the producer is able to pass on is around 3.5%. In that case, and he is the primary, or he or she is the primary borrower of funds from the bank, and borrowing at 10 or 11%, it is a burden.
It's a burden, yeah.
And one of the this extraordinary monetary policy in the United States. By the way, United States charter mandate to the central bank very clearly says maximum employment with price stability. It doesn't give them a single target. Even the United States says that the target is maximum employment with price stability. Yeah. So if you look at the United States, the very extraordinary monetary policy easing, what it has done is been able to recapitalize the entire banks and financial system without subvention of the government. Of course, it's created a risk in the central bank's balance sheet, but it serves a certain purpose. Anyway, so that's a long story. I think we don't have time for that.
Maybe India could also look at some out-of-the-box thinking. Thank you very much, Dr. Saumitra Chaudhuri, for talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.